You guys have a
Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and I'm here today with Janus, and we're going to share our thoughts on theurgy. Greetings and welcome, Janus.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be a guest.
Now, I'd like to know more about you and your journey. What brought you to theurgy?
Well, I started my magical journey pretty early. I think I was about 15 when I started actually experimenting with magic and in all of its forms. Um, and as a child, I had many psychic experiences, contact with spirits of the dead. My mother encouraged my inclinations. And so I was sort of in a supportive environment. I remember my mother doing psychic exercises with me when I was a child. And it helped to grow up in the 80s when there were all these movies about, like Firestarter and things like that. Um, so I grew up as a kid obsessed with the paranormal and strange phenomena and hauntings and things like that and psi phenomena. And as a teenager, I started experimenting with magic. And when I was about 17 years old, I met an extraordinarily accomplished magical practitioner. And it was contact with this person that actually led me to realize in a more concrete way the actual presence of the transpersonal forces that we call the deities.
So you
I
associate the deities with transpersonal forces, so you have a Jungian archetypal perspective. I do as well, to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the thing with Jung is that people misunderstand what he was doing. He pulled a great trick on the scientific establishment by legitimizing spiritual reality. He was just such a genius that he was able to use their language to do it. So when we talk about the collective unconscious, it isn't just a psychological thing. It's literally the anima mundi, you
Right.
know? Yeah. And I did it right when I was about, well, so I'm getting ahead of myself. So when I was about 19 or 20, I realized I had an aspiration to enter the Gnostic priesthood. And unfortunately, that aspiration was temporarily interrupted, and I had to move from where I had moved to study. I was studying under a priest, who then was the second he was the first theurgist I ever met. And like me, this is how karmas work. Like me, he was both, I guess you could say, Christian and pagan for lack of a better terminology. He embraced a Yamblikian methodology and orthopraxy in what he did. He was a Golden Dawn initiate, and he also was an extraordinarily powerful magician and theurgist. I had to leave though, and so I ended up, in order to raise my child, I ended up moving back to another city. And during this time, I realized that since I couldn't enter priesthood, I would start practicing operative theurgy. And so, on the Christian end of things, I came across an incredible book by Muni Sadhu called Theurgy. And this is a very Martinist Christian approach to theurgy. But then, being somebody who also has a profound alignment with an affinity with the ancestral deities, of my people, which are primarily Mediterranean, I've always um, had an interest in, the late antique world. So that Alexandrian synthesis of um, the Greek and Egyptian and Roman and even Persian worlds that converged in Alexandria, the theurgy that arose from that, which came from, of course, Orphic sources and Pythagorean sources, and the mystery cults and the diaspora of the Hermetic priesthood that ended up in Alexandria and created a secret lodge. These are the things that really inspired me. On the one hand, I was reading the Nag Hammadi library at 17 and 18, and on the other hand, I was reading the Greek magical papyri before the explosion of interest in it, and I was experimenting with it. So I performed after I had moved back to this city that I did not want to be in. I performed a rite because I started seeing signs that a particular being was my Agathodaimon, my good genius or holy guardian angel or whatever you want to call it. And I thought, okay, either I am just projecting wishful thinking onto my environment unconsciously, or these are actual signs I'm getting because they kept happening. And as you know, the gods communicate through synthemata and symbola, symbols and signs, you know. So I did this ritual and a god made contact with me and placed a token within my soul. And that showed me that the signs I was receiving were authentic. It was a life transforming event. It was a pivotal point in my life. And it my entire life was reorganized by contact with the sacred in this way. And so from that point on, Theurgy became really my primary passion in life. And it still is. It's something I'm deeply devoted to, the idea of Thea Ergon, divine work. But I like to, words are important to me as a devotee of Hermes Thoth. And so I like to play a little bit. And, we call ourselves theurgists sometimes or aspire to be that. But on the other hand, I like the idea of being a theurge because a theurgist is like somebody who is a worker in theurgy, but I like the word theurge, even if it may not be grammatically correct, because I like the idea of being the very being theurgy, not just doing theurgy, but the urge rising within us, the ethos of the numen from the God is what acts through us when we engage through the Sunthemata with the leader of our series.
That is a very unique take on theurgy, but I follow where you're coming from. How would you define the theurgy? It's been defined in very many different ways. I think each theurgist I've ever spoken to has a different way of defining it. Literally means divine practices or divine deeds. So, how do you define theurgy?
Try not to divine it because for me, um, I am for me, theurgy ultimately is a verb,
Okay.
so it's in what we're doing. So could we say that theurgy is a means of communicating with the gods through the symbolic language of ritual and ceremony? For sure. But is theurgy also in attunement with the God within, and then um, a way to become purified in such a manner that we are able to become more more finely tuned instruments of the gods? Yes. Is theurgy also a way to understand how the divine has sown seeds of itself in nature and how to interact with the divine by recognizing its tokens everywhere? Yes. And then soul is everywhere. And so I think that soul is important too. Now, I do think it's important with theurgy to understand the distinction between theurgy and other forms of magic like Goetia. And I know these are more like Goetia, thaumaturgy. These aren't as hard and fast as like certain scholars like to make them out to be.
You're very correct, and also they're very ill-defined, like thaumaturgia, because I'm Greek. I was raised in the language and with all this stuff was brainwashed into me at a very young age. Uh, Thaumaturgia means the performance of miracles, and in our modern time, it's come to mean like a lower type of magic. But by most definitions, performing miracles is high magic and deific magic. And also, like the word daemon. The daemon means an intermediary spirit. That's it. It means an in-between spirit. That is a spirit that inhabits a space between the underworld and the earth, or the earth and the sky. But now it's come to mean something dark and evil and
And I think I'm deeply into, so Iamblichus goes deeply into the whole, the science of the daimons and the angeloi, the angels and daimons, which really, the angels are part of the ascending series with the heroes, and then the daimons are part of the descending series. But daimons aren't evil; they draw down the forces of life and light from the gods into nature.
Mhm.
And this, today I was speaking to somebody very precious to me, and I was about how I was sitting outside and I was watching the flowers passing from the trees into the grass and birds becoming warmed by the sun. And, when you have these moments of transcendent beauty in nature, you realize that the miraculous is immanent in nature. And that experience of the miraculous immanence of the sacred in nature, to me, is also theurgy. And we enter into communion with that revelation of the sacred through nature, and we can, I believe, communicate through that with the root of all of it.
Yes, many do, and it's always a great realization, a great feeling when you can sense this oneness with nature and the oneness with you all. Um, I've always been of the opinion that you can't not be one with you all. And it's my own personal experience, and this does not mean I'm more spiritual or more anything than anybody else. It's just I can't figure out how you can be anything other than one with you all because
Yeah,
you're part of what's going on. So
yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. And I do think that, when we practice the Theurgy, I think one of the things it does is it does see, I've learned lately the way I express these things has changed a little bit, because not only from the education of excellent teachers whose insight surpasses my own, but the idea of divine pervasion, the idea that, not even the idea, to me, the reality, and it sounds like for you too, the reality of the pervasiveness of the divine everywhere. That there is nowhere where the gods are not present. There is nowhere where the divine is not present. So then to say, for instance, that theurgy spiritualizes us implies an action upon our soul from something external to it, which transforms it. But I've come to view the effects of theurgic activity as awakening a Platonic anamnesis, a remembering, and the spiritualization that occurs is actually more of a emergent unfoldment of inherent characteristics that originate in the pattern of the God.
I believe along similar lines, it's been my experience. And again, I don't feel I'm more spiritual than anybody else anywhere. This is true of a potato or a stone.
Yeah.
I believe that we're the gods here dreaming. I do a lot of work with altered states and with dreams. And our mind has the power to create entire worlds, some of which are very similar to this one, some of which are very different from this one. And I've never, my description of my experience daily differs from that of most people in that I never feel fully connected to this place. And this seems less real than some of the places I've accessed with my mind through my dream work or through my altered state work. So I believe that our reality is somewhere else, and this is part of our reality experiencing this. And it's important and somehow it has to do with the digestion of experience, and that we serve a purpose even if we're not aware that we serve a purpose. And the more aware we get, the more choices we have, because we become part of the process of the remembering. So we're already there. There's no heaven for us to earn. We're already in heaven, and we're dreaming this. And that's always been my personal opinion, and nothing I've experienced has changed that. I'm almost 70 now.
Well, I was gonna say, you look more like you're about 60, so you're doing something right.
Thanks.
Um, you also have the benefit of, this being your genetic inheritance as a Hellenic person. I do believe if you look at like the cults of antiquity, especially the Mediterranean cults, well, most cults and most cultures, but remembrance includes an ancestral component, like in the rites of Eleusis.
It's called ancestor work now, and there's been a lot of good books written on it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been transformative for me.
Yeah, for me too. I was very surprised because I was thought I was a maverick in some ways, and that my journey had taken me far from my ancestral tree. And I'm doing the
Oh.
work. I discovered that no, the apple fell right to the ground near the roots, and then I have stayed very far from my ancestral path. So that was quite an awakening.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's really interesting. Um, in the Hermetica, quoting, actually paraphrasing Heraclitus, it says that the gods are nothing but immortal men and men are nothing but mortal gods.
Hmm.
And then also in the Hermetica, it refers to Agathos Daimon as the firstborn god, ancestor of gods and men, illustrating the fact that we with the gods have a common ancestor in the supreme nous of the universe. And I would say that my theurgic work has helped me to realize the reality of that paternal nous that is at the foundation of the cosmic order.
For those who don't know, the terminology nous means mind in modern Greek, and it's the universal mind.
Like the Buddha mind.
Mhm.
I'm pretty convinced that, when the Buddhists are talking about the Buddha mind that's realized, that is essentially the same as what the Hermetists were speaking about with the divine nous.
There is a very theosophic uh, component to a lot of the ancient philosophies, in that back then there wasn't hubbub made about cultural appropriation. They were very free with culturally sharing. So when they went as merchants, one of the first things they did was, okay, you got the strong guy over here, he's Hercules. You got the king of the gods from Thunderbolt of Zeus, and they made these associations quite freely. And eventually, there would be either like surnames or epithets added to the god's name to show the association. And they were even in iconography quite different, but what the association was made clear to everybody. And I like the theosophical systems of belief, especially the modern. Have you ever delved into modern theosophy or the
I
neo?
have. Yeah.
I like the concept of all these heavenly beings working together to help man in his evolution back to his divine state. There isn't a conflict because of some of the older mythologies. So I've been a big proponent of that. Um, but it's fascinating. There's a lifetime of study, and it's a joyous study, and it's an interesting study, and it's a thought-provoking study. And I can't see how everybody's enamored of it, but I'm glad to be speaking to another person who sees the world similarly and is enjoying all this ancient and modern knowledge floating around.
For sure. We're really in a golden age of knowledge. It's amazing how much is available. And even in just the past 30 years or so, I mean, I remember, back in the 90s when I was starting to stumble upon these things, which I know now wasn't an accident, there was far less available. Now, there were still some spectacular works available, but they were often prohibitively expensive too, because when you're dealing with like Brill or, you know what I mean, these college presses, like one book is like $200, it
There's
hurts.
kind of impresses now. Some of the theurgists on our Theurgy show, who were my co-authors in the book Theurgy that Llewellyn just released, they have independent presses that are publishing a lot of these very hard to find and very expensive books. And it's amazing the type of stuff they've come out with that they've translated and expanded upon and shared.
Yeah, it's a great time for this, and I follow several of the people who are who are in that book and on your show, and it just gladdens my heart to see this because my personal point of view is that the practice of theurgy ennobles the soul. It awakens the noble characteristics of the eternal self. And, I think that if we can make the volitional, intentional choice to offer our temporary personality and habitual character as an offering to the divine so that it may use it as an instrument to radiate its influence into the world, then the timeless part of us, which surpasses the passage of death, becomes awakened. In many traditional cultures, the kingship and the nobility originates in the influence of a deity. So you have the solar lineage of Japan, where the royal house was descended from Amaterasu, or you have Italy, where for instance, Caesar counted both Venus and Mars as his ancestors. In Nigeria, Chango is the root of all of the kingship there. This is a traditional system. In the English royalty count Lord Woden as one of their primary ancestors. And so I believe also that theurgy is necessary because those of us who practice it bridge the earthly world with the world of the gods, and that enables that enlinkment to occur, which can be profoundly healing for the world and also for us. I'm a better person not because I attribute my good qualities to the presence of the God within me and the God who has spoken to me, and I assign my victories and triumphs in my life to Him.
That's called an onomatopoeia. I don't know if in the ancient term, but in modern Greek theology, it means you do something in the name of the god. So then all your actions become a sacrifice or a prayer, if you will. They become tied, and it's not an ego thing. It's I not even surrender. I acknowledge the oneness with my highest self, and I choose to anchor my highest self here and to be a vehicle for my higher self to operate in the larger world.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It's kind of like the Eastern idea of bhakti.
Mhm.
Everything becomes a prayer.
Yes.
Your whole life becomes a prayer. And so this is why to me all gods are true, all gods are real. Because when you experience even one god or goddess, and you realize that this is a real being with its own intentions, its own consciousness, it's not just the personification of a force of nature, although the gods are directly related to the forces of nature, and it's not just an idea that men came up with. It's a real thing, it's a living being. And when you realize this, and you realize, well, if one God is real, then the others must be real. And then for some people, like myself, that's an encouragement to try and make contact with some of the others. And then the other divine beings. Iamblichus talks about how every God has angels and daimons, you know? And so it's so inspiring to enter into these relationships. And so I think that it can be great for our personal lives and our material lives. Another thing I love about theurgy is it does not denigrate the fact that we have material necessities. And when
Right.
you entrust yourself to the care of the gods, the theoi, they provide for you.
They provide for you not in the way you may feel they should provide for you, but they do provide for you. I remember once I was in one of my interactions with the universe. I said that I wanted millions of dollars so I could start a retirement home in the woods of Pennsylvania for metaphysicians. Because
I love it.
metaphysicians, we devote our life to the stuff, and then we face a bleak retirement. So I thought it would be a great idea to buy like a camp that's out of business with little cabins or something. So I asked for millions of dollars, and I did. I got within a day, I got millions of dollars and continued for weeks. But it wasn't real money. It was fake $1 million bills, advertising political things or the Statue of Liberty on it or something. And the chances of my getting all this fake money with printed with millions of dollars on it was as remote or more remote than it would have been to get real money. But the gods have a sense of humor, and the universe does. So prayer heeded, answered, and provided for, but not exactly what I thought it would be.
That's actually hilarious. That sounds like a very Hermes kind of trick, actually.
Yes.
Another thing that theurgy has taught me is the way that we can create harmony.
Mhm.
Like the dove and the rose and copper are all harmonized. They're expressions of, they're manifestations of the power that is Aphrodite or Venus. And so by um, aggregating and organizing things that express the nature and character of a deity in a harmonious way, we can naturally manifest the presence of that consciousness in our environment. And so that's an element of the science, I guess you could say, of theurgy, where it's I think it's less drawing down a force because that is a sort of deterministic idea. I think it's more about almost like tuning a radio station or amplifying a signal, a signal that's always there.
That's a good way of looking at it. That's a better metaphor than the one I used. Yes.
It's this change that occurred, and I will say that it's a lot of it's occurred from devotion to the Divine Mother. My I've it's always been important to me just as it's been important to me to study within both um you could say I don't like using the word pagan, but pagan paradigm and Abrahamic paradigm simultaneously. So also it's always been important to me to study both Eastern and Western spiritual traditions in tandem. Um, and in the East, one thing that has continued in a complete and unbroken way is the devotion to the Divine Mother and the sacred feminine, both in Tantric Buddhism and in the Shakta cults of India, the Shaiva and Shakta cults of India. And the mother is always associated with Gnostic experience, with direct experience of the divine because of her radical immanence and inherently transformative nature. And so by devoting myself to her, and I'm like a child, I barely know anything, but by devoting myself to her, it reorganized my perception of reality in such a way that I was able to see this sort of harmonious oneness and this immanence that is everywhere in a way that I only maybe conceptually understood prior to this.
Well, you're good company. Socrates realized that the only thing he knew for sure was that he knew nothing,
Yeah.
and accorded him the title of the wisest among the Greeks.
It's like the via negativa, your ignorance increases in proportion to your knowledge, but there's an exponential increase of your awareness of your own ignorance, which should engender a type of humility, in my opinion.
Very, very, very true. What role do you think theurgists should take in, like, publicly in the world today, or should they have a role?
I think the work of the theurgist in the world should be one of healing and of blessing, um, of providing counsel. A theurgist properly working along whatever paradigm they're working within, um, religiously, spiritually, mystically, is a transformative center of divine influence. And so that requires us to hold ourselves to a higher standard and therefore represent that dignity and nobility that originates in the divinity. And one of the obligations of nobility is noblesse oblige. And noblesse oblige is the obligation of the greater to care for the lesser. So I believe a true representation of a person who has experienced the consequences of divine influence are what I call supreme benevolence.
And do you feel that theurgists should get involved politically with the political issue?
I think it can be dangerous because there are transpersonal forces behind politics that are of a psychic and spiritual nature that can and will violently respond if there's a threat of their agendas being counteracted. So I personally believe in the exercise of circumspection and the hesitation about taking a public position. You have to consider historically in the antique world, we did have state priests like the Romans, the Roman religion was a state religion. So this was, that was a theocratic state, though. We live in a secular state ruled by merchants, which is why in the East they say we're in the Kali Yuga right now, or in the, in the Greek sense, I guess we would be in the Age of Lead.
Mhm.
And, so being ruled by merchants also means that the merchant class means that we're being ruled by the quantity and by by forces that see people as objects to be exploited. And so the forces behind that kind of ideology are pernicious, counter-initiatic, and inherently antagonistic, I believe, to the well-being of humanity. So I think that rather than, but historically, in the Greeks, in the Hellenic sense, and also in the Egyptian sense, priesthood is governed by Hermes or Thoth. And this is a god who is impartial. Thus a carax or a herald was able to pass between parties at war without being harmed by the opposing party. Like, if you had two city-states at war and the herald from one goes over to the other side to communicate with the other side, it was a sin to harm them in any way. And
That
so
did
the
happen on occasion.
what's that?
That did happen on occasion, though, even in the mythology. Hercules of myth from Thebes was said to have cut off the noses of the heralds that came from a conquering king to Thebes to demand cattle.
What do you think about that?
I think it's a horrible, horrible offense because, as you point out, that these people help communication go back and forth, but it's in the mythology.
Yeah. Well, and I want to return to that too, but because Hercules is a special figure to me, my son, his middle name is Heracles because I wanted Lord Heracles to watch over him. And it's funny because then when he got older, he got involved with wrestling and jujitsu, and his personality traits do mirror Hercules's traits, good and bad, you know? And so, he's sacred to me, but he's also sacred to Hermes. For instance, in the Persian sources, Ogdoad, the eighth realm that is Hermes's aeon or worlds, is also called Herculia.
Yes, there was crossover, and Heracles was said to be the god or the deity of heroic ventures of a business kind as well. And he was honored in the Agora, the, the hills in Rome. The Ara Maxima was dedicated to him, where a lot of commerce was taking place. It was a cattle market that he founded when he had his labor with Gerion's cattle. He was bringing back to Mycenae through circuitous route. So yes, there's a lot of crossover. There were firms of Hercules as well.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, some of them
And
survive to this day. If you Google it, you'll find them.
I think Hercules is so important because he demonstrates the pathos of being human so deeply and so profoundly, but he also shows us that the heroic path is one where you don't give up, you keep trying, you keep getting up. You know what I mean? He makes profound mistakes in his life, but then he also achieves tremendous things, and he never gives up.
My birth name translates from the modern to the ancient into Hercules. It literally means, but modern wise, dedicated to the Queen of Heaven, which is what Hercules meant. And I'm a Lemnian Greek. Lemnos is the island where the Argonauts landed, and the Amazon women reigned
Wow.
in the voyage of the Argo. And Hercules appeared there as a god to get the bow and arrow that he gave to Philoctetes to Odysseus so that Odysseus can triumph in Troy. So I have a special connection also. And that's one of the things I liked about the mythology and spirituality. Yes, you never give up. You're indomitable and you persevere and you move forward, and that you will make mistakes, some of them tragic.
Yeah.
That should not prevent you from being a force of good in the world. You know, a lot of people believe if they've done something wrong, they shouldn't contribute to the world or interact with the world. The Hercules spirituality tells you, no, you could be the son of the highest god in the pantheon and you still make human mistakes. Human experience is hard, but that shouldn't prevent you from, again, bringing the divine into the lives of everyday people and keeping it alive inside yourself.
That's so well said. That's a cornerstone of my personal philosophy and the way the something I have tried to teach my son, raising him, is this principle. And it's an admirable thing, and it's not easy. I've made Herculean mistakes myself, and but yet you cannot allow the imperfection of your lower nature to undermine the resolve to become a better creature,
Right.
you know?
Along similar lines. So it's good to be discussing Herculean spirituality. That's a rare treat. In,
Yeah, well, it's just such a fascinating figure to me, and his close association with Hermes too. Also, Hermes is god of the gymnasium,
yes.
and Hercules is the archetypal athlete. So, there's all these connections there between the two of them. And but to get back to what we were talking about, so the herald is the arbiter. And except in those rare cases, there's a sort of impartiality, given that Hermes Thoth is the god of priests and priesthood, being Hermes Logios, the god of the Logos, the word, the mediating principle that is embodied in the symbolism of the Karakion, the caduceus. I believe that a theurgist is a priest, and therefore a priest's primary aim should be one of benefiting, looking for the greatest good and benefiting all. So we have to be beyond the petty squabbles of temporal issues, but it also means we have to be judicious and see things as they are rather than what we want them to be. I believe that in the age we're in, because of the secular materialist paradigm, the those behind politics and the forces behind them use politics to hijack the human religious instinct. And so people divorced from a sense of spirituality or relationship with the divine are more easily manipulated by politics, which hijacks that impulse towards the divine. And so you'll notice a lot of people who are rudderless spiritually, um, treat politics like a religion and deify, idealize and deify and lionize politicians, who are usually the most corrupt people in the world.
Not all politicians are. I'm a politician.
Oh,
Uh,
sorry.
it's a minor office, but I've held it for a few years now, and I just recently re-won it. And it's with county committee, and I have a district here in my hometown. And I mostly it's voting on whether to do things or not do things. And in a previous administration, we had through the Chamber of Commerce a interfaith parade, and I was the grandmaster of the parade.
Oh, nice.
Open up the meeting with a blessing to Mount Olympus and end the event with a blessing from Mount Olympus as well. And we have people from both the pagan and Abrahamic religions sharing what their practices are. And we even had a motto in 10 o'clock, we celebrate our differences together. That no longer happens, but it happened for a bunch of years. And the reason I asked you the question, and again, I'm not upset if people believe all politicians are corrupt, stuff like that. That's okay. Everyone's entitled to their view of the universe, and I believe we should, through conversation, expand our mind by listening to other people's beliefs and perception and trying to understand how we see things, and because this affects how we treat each other and the things that we do. Many things, as you point out, are being done now that are not spiritual. Like, for instance, women losing their bodily autonomy. And also now what's being done with religions being excluded as religions from the military and from other organizations using the list that the military is coming up with. So some mostly pagan organizations are making statements objecting to this. So the Theurgy Council of North America recently wrote something, and I shared it. And I happen to like them and believe in what they're doing. And I just wanted to see where your opinion was, because the people are divided on this. And I believe it's important to know what your rulers are doing so that you don't wind up becoming a slave to beliefs that you don't hold or to principles that you can't uphold. But anyway, that's my perspective. So I wanted to know by asking you the question if you wanted to be included in such conversations, because you're very educated, you're very articulate, you're very entertaining and pleasant. So I'm going to invite you back as a guest again. So I just wanted to place which conversations to invite you back to discuss.
Well, I'm honored by your kindness, and I would say that anything good about me that you may witness is really just the Lord Mercury's influence upon my personality because I'm completely submissive to him. I wouldn't say that there's, I have been born witness to so many flaws in my habitual character over the years that I have strenuously attempted to perfect. And it's only through his influence that I've been able to purify those characteristics, and by purifying them, unlock the inherent virtues that were present within the obscurations that they manifested. But I will add that so I'm saying any praise is due to him and not me. But I will add that I don't believe that politicians have any right to tell people about any right to restrict the autonomy of human beings. I believe that liberty is a sacred thing, and it isn't right to tell people what religion they can or cannot practice. It isn't. I am not a woman. I have absolutely no right to tell women what to do in any way whatsoever, nor do I have a wish to do so. And why should a government be able to do that? I think this is atrocity. If it were up to me, though, we would live in I'm a theocratic monarchist. I believe in a republic of philosopher kings is the ideal situation, a Platonic republic of philosopher kings, and you manifested that a little bit in your position.
Well, Plato's writings on that some people are saying he's the father of fascism, because that's what they found out in reading the Republic. But thank you very much. Now, you also had a platform, and it was a platform that brought a lot of attention to what you were doing. Can you share a little bit about that platform, and are you planning on resurrecting it?
I'd be delighted to share about that. So my best friend, Dominic Ciccarelli, who has been the voice of reason in my life since I was about 15 years old, is he and I had a podcast that went on for about 5 years called The Magician and the Fool podcast. And actually, one of our primary uh, intentions with that was to disseminate um, knowledge of theurgy and to draw people's awareness to what theurgy was. And so we had spectacular guests on there, and people that just absolutely humbled me with their wisdom, spectacular scholars, and we learned so much. And so I won't lie, that part of there was a little bit of a selfish intention there. We got to hang out with people that we kind of found amazing and learn from them. We got to learn, get it straight from the horse's mouth. But then we wanted to give that to everyone. It was a not-for-profit activity that really came from us being inflamed with passion for the sacred life and the divine. And we feel really proud about that. We feel really good about what we achieved there. And we have had so many people say to us how it changed their lives, how they were exposed to ideas they'd never encountered before, how it ignited a passion for doing these things themselves. And that's what we wanted. We wanted to sort of engage in a work of anamnesis. And I have to give credit to my beloved friend Dominic because he tirelessly worked for hours on these episodes, and he's a meticulous perfectionist in some ways. So yeah, as you know, doing these things, it can take on the back end, the technical end takes a lot of work too. And I really got to give him credit with that. But we also had a pansophic perspective. We'd be talking about maybe the Greek theurgy, and then maybe we'd speak to somebody who was in like Umbanda and speak about, Brazilian spiritist religion. And then we'd speak about, maybe somebody, we spoke to Shawnee Oates from the clan of Tubal-Cain at one point. That's one of my favorite interviews we had. The idea was to expose people to depth and profundity and what it looks like when we're living a life devoted to the mysteries. And I I'm really proud of what we did. Is there something new coming? Yeah, there are actually two things I'm working on. One will be something I'm going to be doing myself, which will still be focused along the sort of mystical axis, but will also have an aesthetic component. Um, and then there's another podcast that I'm going to be doing with my friend Nicholas Schreck called Urgrund, where we address, I guess you could say, hardcore spiritual issues in the modern age. And that there will be a political component to it, but kind of coming from the place I came from here, where, you know, both Nicholas and I are devotees of the mystical god Abraxas.
Okay.
And so Abraxas is always at war with the forces of ignorance. He's the god who is in constant. I think it might have been the band Coil that said the price of existence is eternal warfare. So the warfare, though, isn't a physical warfare, but a spiritual warfare, first with ourselves, against the forces of ignorance in ourselves, against our biases, against our shortcomings and weaknesses. But then it's also a war of knowledge, a war of love against hate, a war of knowledge against ignorance, a war of liberty against those forces that would constrain our liberty. This is one of the aspects of Abraxas. And so that podcast will be dedicated to that sacred act of ultimate freedom and ultimate liberation and confronting the truth as it is in itself. Whereas the other project I'm doing, which I don't want to reveal too much about yet, is going to be a personal sort of work of love that is more like poetic and romantic and spiritual.
This is a nonprofit endeavor, in case you're wondering, so I can understand your passion and devotion to how you want to express yourself. I'm going to invite you to one of my shows called Olympian Paths.
Ooh, okay.
That is a path about how people have tuned themselves with the uh, Olympian pantheon and how that translates into their life in the world of today. And so we can explore your relationship with Denise through that. And then also, when you get these projects off the ground, I'd be honored to interview you so to help promote what it is that you're doing.
Thank you. I was actually going to say that I really hope that you'd agree to come on one of them too, because it's been such a pleasure talking with you tonight.
Thank you very much. So pleasure is mutual. I really enjoyed this a great deal. How can people find you and learn more about you and enter your world?
Well, the Magician and the Fool podcast still has a Facebook page, and it is going to be becoming more active as I do these projects. I also am a professional tarot card reader, and so I have an Instagram page with one post on it, but you can at least contact. I have a love-hate relationship with social media, so I struggle with it, but I can be contacted there, and it's called Full Moon. Um, Divination is something that's a very important part of my life, and I have a great passion for it. And then, yeah, those are probably the two best ways to do it. And I love life. You know what I mean? For as simple as that may sound, but I think that that is because having been somebody who's experienced profound tragedy, I attribute to the fact that I've survived to the gods, to be honest with you. I sometimes feel like a dead man walking. Um, I'm not going to go into my early life or the things I've been through, but I am so grateful to these benevolent, omniscient forces of wisdom and light and life that have sought to provide me with the opportunity to continue living despite my imperfections. And so in my life, I try and at least dedicate as much of it as I can to being of benefit to other people as an act of service to those great theoi who have seen me fit to continue living. And I consider every day is a gift. Every day is a precious, precious gift that we must remember to be grateful for. And I think ultimately, when all is said and done, that I would leave it on this note that theurgy is in essence love. There's a verticality of love to our in our relationship with the divine, and then we can express that love on the horizontal axis of the earth. And if we can just become channels of that divine light, which in its essence and origin and substance is love, then we can radiate that love onto the earth, and we can heal broken hearts, and we can mend what has been torn, and we can comfort those who are in sorrow, and we can also experience sublime joy and pleasure and bliss with those who also seek to bathe in the light of the love of the gods.
Wow, very eloquently said. I'm looking forward to your poetic endeavors because you've demonstrated quite a talent for expressing yourself in creative ways.
You're too kind, my friend. I'm also curious. I'm sad we're coming to the end here because one thing I wanted to ask you is, I feel like you have this Hercules. It's clear you have a deep affinity with Hercules, but I feel like you also have, looking at you, when I see a spiritual affinity with Zeus.
Yes, I rarely talk about that, but yes, you're absolutely correct. I also have a deep affinity with Hermes. Hermes is one of my top four, and a lot of what I do is hermetic. I communicate, I share occult information, and a lot of what I've done professionally in the human service field and in education involves communication. What we're doing now is our Hermenian activities. So
Yeah.
that daily.
Yeah, this is a great offering to Hermes. We would usually say at the beginning of the Magician and of the Fool podcast, we would dedicate our work to Hermes and Asclepius.
Mhm.
And that's a whole aspect we'll have to talk about another time too, is the Asclepius aspect with the dream divination.
Yes, I intend on inviting you to other shows as well. We have a show for semi-regulars on the show called Mages, Sages, Mystics, and Seers. And
Sounds like my kind of party.
these are people who have commitments to other things, but occasionally will wander into the show for an episode or two. Sometimes they'll hang out for like a regular show for like half a year or whatever, and then they're off again doing their thing. And I just had some of them recently come back again from designing shows for.
That's so fun. Well, I would love to be part of anything you're doing. I really enjoyed talking to you tonight, and I'm so honored that you asked me to come on. Thank you for the opportunity and for the gift of being able to spend time with you and get to know you better.
Same here, ditto, and I wish you well in all your endeavors, and I look forward to keeping in contact with you and in speaking with you more on other episodes.
Thank you, dear friend. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, be well.
You too. Bye-bye.